stepping on each other. Will Scott, are you there?
I am sorry I can't be there in person. I'm a little under the weather today, so I didn't want to get anyone sick, but I'm the Deputy Compact Administrator for the parole side of things in New York State.
Thanks, Scott. We appreciate you coming in, not feeling well. Thank you very much. Tim O'Brien?
Good morning, Matt, Kelly, everyone. I appreciate the invitation, and I wish I could be there in person today, but unfortunately I cannot. I serve in the title of as a Director of Internal Operations for Community Supervision for DOCS.
Appreciate it, Tim. Always a strong supporter of the council. We always appreciate that. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Shana Kern. Shana,
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right, great. I'm sorry I'm not there as well. I work under Manager Kelly Palmatier there. Hello, everybody. I am in the adult unit, but I also do the juvenile, manage the juvenile end as well. In the adult unit, I oversee our sex offender population for the interstate cases. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining, Shana. I do want to acknowledge a couple of key retirements from the council. Bob Macaron, who is the former New York Division of Criminal Justice Services Deputy Commissioner and Director over the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. Bob was the Compact Administrator and Commissioner. He retired January 1 and January 2. So we miss Bob very much. He was an active member of the Interstate Commission. I also want to acknowledge the retirement of Elizabeth Conan, who was Director of the Office of Victim Services. Elizabeth was also an active member and a staunch advocate for victims of crime in New York State. They are missed. But we do wish them well. We do have two vacancies on the council. One is our judicial appointment. I know we are working very hard to fill that position. And so hopefully, hoping in the fall, we will have that position filled. The other, we do have another Senate vacancy, which we will be moving to fill also. Those are our two vacancies. I will note that not here are our two Assembly representatives, Senator Brown, Assembly David Leffery, who were not able to join us today, but certainly we will provide them a link to the recording as well as the minutes, so we can keep up with what it's doing. And lastly, I will ask Lisa, do you have time to make yourself comfortable? But our victim rep, and Lisa, would you mind introducing yourself?
I am Lisa Good, victim rep, and the name of my program is Urban Grief, and we provide victim services and support in the aftermath of violence. And so I sit as a provider and a survivor.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today. Everybody has a copy of the agenda. I hope you have the opportunity to look at it. I will ask if anybody would like to add anything to the agenda. I'm waiting for discussion. Do that if they did. If not, I would ask for a motion to approve today's agenda. Okay. Yeah. Second. Thank you. So the agenda is approved. Also included in your packet are the minutes of our October 24th, 2023 meeting. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say everybody hasn't had the opportunity to bring that home and had some late night reading. So if you guys just want to I'll give everybody just a minute or two to take a quick look at that. And if there's anything that jumps out that you would like to think is inaccurate or that we missed something, I'm certainly glad to make those changes. everybody has had the opportunity, I would just ask for a motion to approve the minutes as we have written. One, and a second.
Second.
And the minutes are accepted. Next on our agenda, what we always done is we kind of read the mission statement of the council. We try to read it on every opportunity we have, remind ourselves of the work of the council. And then I'd like to follow up with a little bit of discussion after I read this. I will read it to the membership. The mission of the New York State Council for the Interstate Compact for Adult Supervision is to serve as an advisory body to the State Compact Administrator, make recommendations for the implementation of state policies and procedures that facilitate the effective tracking, supervision, and rehabilitation of individuals under community supervision, advance their orderly transfer across state lines, promote public and victim safety. That mission statement has been with us since we began holding the state council. It is, I think it's important work that the council does. But traditionally, what we've done in these meetings is we've kind of come here and we've kind of dictated to the council members just stuff that we wanted to talk about. Usually that revolves around compliance measures and some of the things that the officers do. What I really want to do is kind of make this council more of a kind of working, active body. Now, I know we only meet twice a year, but I really do want to make the time that we do spend together productive time that we can really engage council members with and really begin to be somewhat of an advisory body. Now, I'm just sticking my toe in the water here. I know nothing is going to happen immediately, but I would ask that the membership really think about ways in which the key stakeholders that are involved in the council really can become active members of our council. And really continuing to support the work of the compact offices. And I'd like to use an example of, to kind of highlight what I mean, is our judicial rep of back in 2019, Judge Michael Levinsky, who's a Kings County Criminal Court judge, was our judicial rep on the council. One of the issues that the commission nationwide was wrestling with was timely warrants for those individuals who absconded from probation. There were at times, if somebody had transferred from New York to another state and that person absconded and that state informed New York, there were times where warrants were not being issued, or they weren't being issued in a timely manner. Sometimes months would go by. Meanwhile, the individual was, nobody knew where that person was. There certainly could have been issues around victim safety. So the commission moved to put a time frame, a 15-day time frame on the issuance of warrants in those when a violation was submitted. And one of our big challenges has always been New York City probation, just abide with people, abide with courts in New York City, to get New York City to comply. And so Judge Levinsky convened a meeting with not only judges throughout New York State, but really court clerks who seemed to really be where the impact was truly made. And I remember it, Bob and I went down on March 6th of 2020, 2 weeks before kind of lives as we knew it changed for COVID. And we met with of judges and court clerks to really talk to them about the importance of getting warrants developed, issued, and uploaded into NCIC. And so that, and since that time, and through a series of trainings that we did, warrants are generally now issued within that 15-day time frame in New York City, which is really kind of unheard of, I think, in any other matter where warrants needs to be issued. And out of that came what is one of New York State's best practices. It's on the Interstate Commission's website as a best practice. Are some face sheets that we developed here in our office for probation departments to put on violations of probation that are interstate related, ensure that the courts know that this is an interstate transfer matter and the warrant needs to be issued within 15 days. And as I said, we now almost always see those warrants issued. So that's an example of a council member, interceding on behalf of an interstate issue and really bringing together some key stakeholders to really address that issue. So that's kind of the participation and the active practice that we would really like to see council members really engage in. And we are really, I think they did a good job in bringing key stakeholders from the legislature, from the victim's side of the house, to the executive role in probation and the judiciary, to really put key members in those positions where we can really make a difference where it's needed. So, one of the things I want the membership to really think about is how we can, moving forward, really make these 2 hours or hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes that we're going to spend together really meaningful and active, and really review some of these challenges that we see and what role the council can play in addressing those. So that's kind of, the homework for the council membership is to really begin to think about how we can do that and how we can structure these meetings to really make it more engaging, instead of us coming here and dictating this is what we're doing here, and the council membership really just kind of listening and then waiting for the next meeting to happen. So that's what I would ask the council membership to do, to really make this mission statement come alive and to really truly be an advisory to DCGS and the compact. Any questions or discussion on that? Anybody remotely? Questions, discussion? Okay. That's that. So now we will move to our compliance. I'll just set the stage here. The Interstate Commission, it does one thing very well. They audit our compact offices on a quarterly basis under 6 key areas, which Kelly's going to cover. And keep in mind that the commission thinks that anything under 80% is a fail grade, and would need a plan of action to remedy that. So I've asked Kelly to talk about some of those key areas of compliance, and reviewing those and correcting people where they should be looking.
Sure. So in your packets on the right, right side, you should have a couple packet little staple papers of different compliance reports, but I'll focus just on, I'll cover New York State's compliance as a whole, which would include probation and paroles numbers together. But we did provide you with paroles specific compliance and probation specific compliance. With regards to these 6 standard performance measures that we are audited quarterly on, as Matt had said. So I'm just going to cover the state's, New York State as a whole. And I'll kind of explain a little bit about what each of the 6 standards mean. So the first one that you'll see is for, on the left, is for the case closure compliance, and that would be when New York State is the supervising state or the receiving state in an interstate transfer case. They have 10 business days to submit that case closure to the sending state, and that could be, at the end of the term of supervision, or it could be in other instances where maybe somebody has returned back to the state that they were sentenced in. There's a couple different scenarios that might happen there, but the requirement is to submit that case closure within 10 business days. You will see both the national average on the right and the state average on the left. So we are at 95.54% for New York State, and the national average was 96.45%. For the case closure replies, and we are responsible as the sentencing state or the sending state for submitting a reply to the other state's case closure notice within 10 business days of receiving that reply or that case closure. So we are at 97.74% compliant in that area. For the request for progress reports, As the receiving state or the state that's providing supervision to an individual who's transferred under the compact, we are required to submit a detailed progress report to the sentencing state within 30 calendar days of receiving a request from the sending state for that report. So we're currently at 96.85% compliant in that area. The national average is 92.32%. The reporting instructions, RI stands for reporting instructions, which is a request that a sentencing state can submit to the state that that person wants to transfer to. And that would allow that individual to be present in the state prior to acceptance of their transfer. We are required to reply to that request within 2 business days of receipt, and we have 5 business days if it's a somebody who meets the definition of a sex offender. So in that area, we are 98.87% compliant. The national average is 97.48%. For the transfer reply compliance, these are your actual transfer requests. So when somebody requests to relocate to New York State, we must submit a response to that request within 45 days, calendar days of receiving that request. And so the state is at 96.81% compliance in that area, and the national average is 95.53%. And then finally, the violation response compliance. So when we are the sending state in an interstate case, so the person was sentenced here in New York and they're being supervised, for example, in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania submits a violation report to us saying that they've violated certain conditions and that we're requiring that they be brought back to New York. We have to submit a response to that violation report within 10 business days of receipt. So we're at 98.69% compliance in that area. The national average is 90.64%. So those are the 6 standards that we are measured on a regular basis by the national office. And as you can see, we do very well in those areas, a large part to our, compact office staff that works hard with our local probation departments. Parole has a little bit different of a setup, but the probation departments and a compact office staff really do a great job of making sure that we stay compliant with those requirements of the compact. Actually, Scott was going to, there's also a second kind of a grid that you'll see in your packet. That's some additional information that Scott is going to cover for us.
Thanks, Kelly. Kelly put together this nice chart, and it details the amount of applications that we processed both in probation and parole in New York State for the last year, as well as the total number of compact cases under supervision in New York State and New York State cases that are transferred out of state. So the top part of the chart is the total applications coming in, and it's broke down by month. Based on these numbers, probation is receiving about 200 applications per month, and parole is receiving about 80 per month. And then the other part of this section is showing the outgoing transfer applications. Those are New York State cases that are applying to go out of New York State to another state for supervision, and probation's averaging about 74 per month. Parole's averaging about 59 per month. And then in the last box, you'll see the total number of cases. Parole received 958 applications, and probation received 2,408 for the last year. Parole sent out about 709 applications. Probation sent out about 890. So the total applications received from parole for last year was 1,667. And the total numbers received for probation was 3,298, which totaled 4,965 applications processed in both the parole and probation office just in New York State alone. The bottom part of the chart are the total number of compact cases under supervision, broke down per month. This averages, it looks like New York State supervises other probationers at a rate of about 3,303 per month, and parole averages about 1,050 out-of-state parolees being supervised in New York State. As far as the outgoing cases, probation sends out about, or New York State probation cases on average is about 1,623 cases being supervised out of state, and parole is about 755 per month. Again, I got to give Kelly credit for this chart. She's the one who put it together, so she did a nice job with that.
Thanks, Scott. So as you can see, New York's kind of a destination, and we have a lot more individuals coming into New York State now. A large segment of those are New York State residents who have committed a crime outside of New York State or just returned home. The other big qualifying reason that we see is people coming to New York State because they have what they call resident family, as it's defined. They have a parent or adult child or adult sibling who lives in New York State that they're requesting to come and live with. And really what I think both our probation and parole offices, compact offices do a very good job of is really recognizing where they want, where's the best place for this individual, their supervision, to be most successful. Is it going to be in New York? If it's in New York, then, we're going to try to get them to New York to be able to, have the opportunities at success. We do this, or the compact offices do this always with an eye towards public safety. So they really do an excellent job of trying to get people where they're going to be most successful, making sure we're doing everything we can to ensure public and victim safety. So that's very good. I really want to commend both Scott and Kelly for the continued work they do in this area. Not only keeping New York State compliant with the 6 key measures that the commission looks at, but really, making sure that we're doing everything we can to have successful outcomes. So, thank you. I don't know if anybody has questions or any further discussion that they'd like to raise.
I'm just curious for the violation response rate. New York State is such a strong rate. Do we know why compared to the national average? We're doing so well, I should say.
We really work hard with the probation departments and to make sure that they are understanding what the requirements are of the state once we receive a violation report. So as Matt mentioned, we have a face sheet that we provide them. And so once we receive the violation report, we will reach out to the local probation department and we will say, we received an absconder violation report. Under the ICAOS rules, these are our requirements. Here's a face sheet that you can attach to the violation when you're submitting it to the court. And then we provide them dates. We need a response by this day, and we need to have the warrant issued by this day. And so we monitor that and we follow up with them weekly until we get the response that we need.
Great, thank you. Scott, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I mean, in our case, it's a little bit easier. Once we receive the violation, we have supervisors in our office that review it to make sure it meets the requirements of a violation. And then once the supervisors review it, we make sure we have all our documentation from the other states, and then as a group, we conference it and then make a determination if a warrant's issued or not. So it's a little easier for us than dealing with the courts.
And on the probation end, I will add that, it comes into our office here at DCGS, but then we have to send it out to the local probation department for review and then monitor that response. So it is a little bit tricky. There's 58 probation departments in New York State. We have to, work with each one of them to make sure that they are being responsive to our office. And as you can see, Kelly's unit does a fantastic job in making sure that they get those responses. Thank you, Dean. Great. Thank you.
So we're markedly above average across the board, except for that first item, which is minor differences. That's simply due to volume.
I think it's both. We do a lot of work in ensuring that we're compliant. We send out a monthly list to our county probation departments, and I'm, Scott's situation's a little bit different, but I can speak for probation, the probation side. We run reports and we send information to our local probation departments and say, in the month of May, this is what you have coming down the line. So you're going to need to, these cases are closing, so they'll require a report. You have these transfer requests that are pending, so that, your replies are due within this time frame. So I think those things help, and not every state has procedures like that in place. And every state kind of runs a little bit differently. Some states supervise their own, their compact office supervises their own cases. Some are kind of a federated system and have probation departments that do the work like we do in New York. So these are all procedures that we just have in place in our office that kind of assist in the compliance that we get, But we are one of the larger states, so the numbers definitely help that way.
And the case closure is both incoming and outgoing.
The case closure would be the cases that we're supervising for somebody else, for another state. The replies would be for the cases that we have transferred out of New York. The case closure is the cases that have transferred to New York, so they're required to close those.
And traditionally, we've been either the 6th or through the 8th busiest compact offices nationwide, as you can imagine, New York State, being very busy. So, that also is a credit to both compact offices being really responsive to the needs of both our probation department as well as the parole offices. Really impressive stuff, and Kelly's unit has really done a great job being proactive and getting. One of the things I do get concerned about, they just the commission kind of looks at, almost how quickly you press a button, how quickly you press send. Really, what I think we'd like to see the commission begin to look at is some of the quality efforts of compact offices. How well are we doing in supervision? How well are we really, there's a rule that requires us to supervise individuals as we would our own. Meaning, transferring from Georgia should not be supervised any differently than somebody sentenced in Albany County. How well are we adhering to that? How well are we responding to non-compliance? Are we just automatically submitting a violation because we think that person should go back to Georgia or go back to wherever they were sentenced? Or are we really taking the time to work with the individuals to try to, correct some of that behavior, to try to provide them with the services that they need here in New York State, which I think really both our probation departments as well as, parole supervision really do a fantastic job on. So I hope that the commission begins to turn their quality assurance efforts towards, using that lens to see how well probation and parole officers are doing to really make sure, again, I would say how, we want to put people where they're going to be most successful. And we're really doing that. Really working with individuals under supervision to, help them succeed, both under supervision as well, give them some tools. I will say, for the benefit of our victim people, we always do that through the lens of public. It's always taken very seriously. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? All right. Thank you, Kelly. One of the things that I wanted to do, had the opportunity to do, which is now, is really, I think we get membership who are generally appointed because of the positions that they hold throughout New York State, whether it be a Senate appointment or the Director of Victim Services or the parole board. And they get appointed to the council, and we really don't give them the opportunity to explain what the Interstate Compact Office does or what the Interstate Compact Office is. So I just wanted to take a brief pause during this, while I do have the reins, as briefly as that may be, is to take an opportunity to give the membership an idea of, what the interstate transfer process is from a 5,000 kind of foot view, looking down and see what it is. So Kelly's going to take us just, as I said, a 5,000 foot view of what that process is to hopefully fill in some of those gaps that membership might have had about trying to understand what we're talking about. And when we talk about some of this stuff, to give them an idea of where that may fit in the process of Interstate. So Kelly's going to, I think in your packets you have.
Yeah, you have a little roadmap. It's also on the screen. We're showing it up here too. So this roadmap kind of gives a general overview, as Matt said, and a very general overview of what the interstate transfer process looks like. We use this in our fundamentals of probation practice training for all new probation officers to kind of just explain what the whole process looks like. So obviously, the transfer process begins when there is a sentence to supervision, or in a parole case, maybe somebody's being released to parole supervision. And so that person, if they have a qualifying offense, and the compact rules state that if you are on supervision for a felony or certain misdemeanor offenses, that if you want to be in another state for longer than 45 days, you have to request a transfer under the interstate compact rules in order to do that. So that's where the whole process starts. So once that person is sentenced in the sending state, they have to stay there. They have an obligation to, complete or serve their sentence in, we'll say, New York State. But then they request, or they say at sentencing, well, I don't live here. I was here on vacation. I live in Florida. My home is in Florida. My support system's in Florida. I am employed in Florida. I can't stay here for the next 5 years to serve my probation sentence. And so that would really trigger the interstate compact transfer request itself. And that transfer and that request is submitted at the discretion of the supervising officer in that case. So transfer is a privilege under the interstate compact. It's not a right. So once that officer has decided, yes, we're going to request a transfer, they would submit to our office that transfer request. In the compact rules outline what needs to be included in that transfer request, and that would be things like the conditions of supervision, details of the incident offense. That person also has to sign an offender application, which also serves as a pre-signed waiver of extradition. So if New York ever had to get that person back, they would not be brought back to New York as a fugitive from justice, but they would be brought back as an interstate retake because they've already waived their right to extradition. So the compact outlines what the sending state needs to include in that transfer request. And while that transfer request is pending, ideally that person is staying in the sending state. The receiving state has 45 days to investigate that transfer and to submit a response. But as we've already talked about, sometimes there's a need for that person to be in the receiving state prior to their case being accepted. So the officer may also request what's called reporting instructions. And if those are approved, that allows that person to be there while their transfer request is pending. So once the receiving state accepts supervision, or they submit their reply saying, yes, we've investigated the plan, the home looks good, this person is accepted for supervision in our state, that is when the person can then proceed to the receiving state. That also happens if they have requested reporting instructions, then they can be allowed to proceed. And then supervision, once that person arrives in the receiving state, then the receiving state has supervision responsibility of that person, and jurisdiction of the case remains with the sending state. So that's why we have progress reports and violation reports and correspondence going back and forth all the time in these cases, because jurisdiction remains in that sentencing state while supervision is being provided by the receiving state. So that's kind of the whole process in a nutshell. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. Concerns, comments?
And that way you can even relate back to some of this compliance measures like reporting instructions, transfer requests, again. And as I said, it's important to get people within. And that, and so, but that's the transfer request. Then there's the supervision piece where, if I'm sending somebody to Oklahoma from New York, the only way I know how well they're doing is if Oklahoma tells me. So I need to request a progress report. And in that case, Oklahoma will give me a supervision summary, which tells me, or tells the judge, or tells the parole office, how well I'm doing. And if they are not compliant to the point where Oklahoma says, I give up, I've done everything I can with Matt Chardon, he's got, there's nothing else we can do to get him to comply, that's when you'll see the violations of probation or violations of parole come through. And that's that key measure that they violate. I will say, and I think this is a very good statistic, probably in the last, 3 years, I would say we see out of all the people that on the probation end that we send out, we only see probably 4 to 6 violations come in a month, sometimes less than that. So it really does tell us that other states are really trying to work with individuals that we send out, which is very good. And I know for a fact that, our probation departments as well as our parole offices, work do everything we possibly can to get somebody to comply before we end up submitting a violation. Any questions, discussion about that? Thank you, Kelly. I thought that was important. So it just gives everybody some idea of what that process is as we continue to talk about it. Never really gave that initial. All right, next on the agenda, one of the things that we did change up a little bit, and we wanted something called focal issues. Some of the issues that both the probation and parole compact office, might be wrestling with, experiencing, some of the challenges that we thought we would like to share with the council, and elicit any of the council's responses, thoughts on what we could do. The first one, Interstate 1, I'm going to kind of review these focal issues with the members.
Sure. So as Matt said, and I actually provided you with some information about the requirements of a sending state when we receive violation reports on our outgoing cases. That kind of gives you an idea of when we're required to issue an interstate warrant. What we run into problems with is not so much the 15 business days that we have to issue the warrant. I think that for the most part, that has become less of an issue, and that the face sheets really help in that process. But what we run into the most is when there's an individual who is on supervision for a misdemeanor offense and they've transferred out to another state, and now we receive a violation report. We're required in some cases to issue that full extradition warrant. And often those warrants are being issued with limited extradition. And I believe that is in law somewhere that maybe, or I haven't been able to pinpoint the exact issue yet, but in those misdemeanor cases, when they're not uploaded into NCIC as required with that full extradition language, I'm reaching out to the sheriff's office or whatever law enforcement agency that's entering those warrants in NCIC to try to get that issue rectified. And they're saying that, oh, I didn't know that we could do this. It's a misdemeanor, and I thought we could only issue a limited extradition, that we're not allowed to issue a full extradition warrant in those cases. And because we're signatory to the compact, and the compact supersedes any state, conflicting state law that, I walk them through the whole process and eventually we get that warrant issued. But those are the most common cases, I feel, that we're having an issue with the warrant, and it takes time. So then we're sometimes running up against that 15 business days or sometimes going over by the time we get it all corrected. So that's one of the areas that we're having an issue with. The other is, which is happening more frequently now, is that when we receive an absconder violation from another state, our obligation is to issue that full extradition warrant within the 15 business days. We don't have any other option in that case. But what we're finding is that the courts are calendaring the case and then waiting for that person to fail to appear to issue that warrant. And sometimes that case is being calendared way outside the 15 business days that we have to issue the warrant. And I know that these are, mainly, this is a judicial kind of issue, and, that member would be helpful with that specific topic. But those are the two issues that we're running into most frequently with the interstate warrants as of late. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions or comments about how we might approach those issues.
Yeah, I think traditionally police departments do not, have misdemeanor warrants labeled as full extradition nationwide as pickup. And most DAs aren't willing to go get those, which I think is the next step. But warrant, as defined by the Interstate Compact, is a nationwide pickup. And so if counties are going to, if counties are going to transfer a misdemeanor case to another state, then they have to recognize that should there be a requirement to retake them, that court, one, has to issue a full extradition warrant, and two, that warranting agency has to upload that into NCIC as a full extradition warrant. And that is such a irregular practice, I think, at that level that we get a lot of pushback. It's a couple-hour conversation trying to track down who we need to talk to in the records room, the warrant officers, and get them to change and upload that warrant to a full extradition warrant, all within that 15-day time frame that we're given to make sure that that's done. So again, a lot of work.
Which kind of leads into the B portion of the focal issues is the cost and obligation of retaking on the county probation departments specifically. We run into a lot of issues, I would say mainly with the technical violations, but we run into a lot of issues where the county probation departments don't have funding to send somebody to another state to pick somebody up and bring them back, especially when they're, they've transferred their supervision to California or Alaska even. I mean, so it really is costly for them to have to retake an individual who has transferred, which is our obligation. So, we run into issues where district attorneys' offices become involved and nobody wants to fund the retaking. And so, we're not sure if there are options or opportunities out there for maybe funding specifically for interstate retaking and, what that might look like. But those are some of the challenges that we come across with our probation department, specifically smaller departments that don't have a large budget and extra money to go and bring people back should we have to. So, that was always one of my areas that I was trying to figure out how we might solve those issues for our probation department specifically.
The requirement is on the local probation department to retake that person. And retaking is getting in, either coordinating with the sheriff's office to have a couple deputies go pick that person up and bring them back to New York State. So you can imagine, especially on misdemeanor warrants, where if somebody is sentenced in New York and they are, well, what my last example was a Cortland County individual was located in the state of Illinois, and the Cortland County district attorney was saying, I'm not going to get this guy. It's a misdemeanor. There's nothing, we don't extradite misdemeanors. And so we had to get on the phone with them because it was an interstate case and say, this is an obligation of your county to go and retake. And he said, that's $2,400. That's, 2/3 of my extradition budget for the year. I've got to spend on this one case that's a misdemeanor that we don't extradite anyway. So those are the challenges, especially as Kelly said, in the smaller counties about spending the money to go and get this individual and bring him or her back to New York State for violation. So always been a challenge. One of the danger areas is if the judge just says, well, no, we're not going to go get him. We're just going to take this individual off probation, which is a violation of the Interstate Compact rules, and certainly New York State subject to penalties should that happen. So it is really kind of, in Kelly's position, putting out a lot of fires, reaching out to these local DAs or sheriff's office to get them to, tell them that there is an interstate compact, two, then explaining the process, and getting them to spend money to go get it. Really one of the longstanding challenges. And not that we don't recognize, a county like Cortland saying, wait a minute, I got to spend 2/3 of my budget on this one, retail extradition. That seems unfair. It does seem unfair, but we've always struggled with the obligation.
Do you have numbers as like statewide, how much money has been spent? Like counties have those kinds of extraditions? Or ballpark?
We did try to get it that one year. We tried to say to the counties, hey, look, can you tell us these extraditions, how much they cost? Because the process is not done by the probation department, sometimes it's the sheriffs, some use private vendors, some, the DA comes out of the DA's budget. So we haven't really been able to get a hold of that, but that is something, I think that's something that we could certainly take another stab at.
Yeah, it might be more feasible now because the violation numbers have really gone down. And so that might be something that is a little, that data might be a lot easier to capture now. But I also think that it becomes difficult if somebody absconds, it might be, they might not be located for years. And so it becomes hard to track those kinds of returns. And sometimes we don't even know it happens. It happens outside of our office, even knowing that that person was located. So I think that we can definitely try for this year at least go back. We don't have we don't have very many violations anymore. As Matt said, there's only about 5 or 6 a month maybe. So we can certainly go and try to track that for the next our next meeting or even next year, do a whole year. But yeah, it's always been very hard for us to figure that out. We had developed a sheet that we would even send to the county probation departments, but we only got very few of them back. So definitely something we can try again.
Seems like something that maybe there should be money allocated to DCJ that's said access to.
Yeah.
Centralized funding.
Yeah. Some of the states, and certainly nothing we would do in New York State because of its inherent unfairness is they charge individuals a fee to transfer their supervision. And they use that fee to supplement their obligation to retake should that happen.
And it's,
I don't think Senator Salazar would support that,
Yeah.
but she might support having some resources made available to the state.
Yeah.
and the towns.
Thank you.
On speaking to the obligations of the probation department, how is restitution handled by the state?
restitution, the receiving state doesn't collect any monies, that all that, it goes right back to the sending state. So the individual would be instructed on where to send payments and things like that.
So then vice versa, they're convicted in New York State, we have a way of, either the majority of the counties who the probation department still in, or the assigned, the assigned restitution collection agency. Are the
Yes.
ones that come.
It's the one condition that the receiving state doesn't enforce. I mean, they can say, hey, look, you gotta pay your restitution to New York, but they can't submit a violation based on that person's failure to pay that restitution. New York can, the sending state can always submit that violation. You know, it's the one condition that receiving states can't enforce.
Okay, and is that a violation that we do enforce upon, when we send it out?
Nassau County just submitted a violation on, for failure to pay restitution was not at the suggestion of the receiving state. So it was a person sentenced in Nassau County who had transferred out and they were not making payments, so they filed their own violation.
But that would trigger retaking on our part.
And the
This-
retaking is the part where you're saying that the receiving state has to pay to send person back.
There are,
Sending state does.
yeah,
The
the
sending state, okay, got it.
yeah, so the state that they're sentenced in, who's bringing them back, has to pay to get them back. There are instances where they can order somebody to return versus issuing the warrant. But if they fail to return as directed, then they are obligated to issue the warrant anyway, so. But in the technical violations, they can order them to return first on their own. And if they come back, then they've satisfied their retaking obligation. But, when they fail to return as directed, then they're obligated to issue that warrant and go and pick them up. But with the Nassau County example, because Nassau County filed that violation on their own, and it wasn't something that was submitted by the state that is supervising the person, they ordered that person back. So that person returned to New York. But that's something that counties often want to do. If somebody has a new conviction in the receiving state and they were placed on supervision in the receiving state, that if the receiving state submits a violation based on that new conviction, we would still be obligated to issue the warrant and go and pick them up. And so our counties often say, well, they have a probation case, they're being supervised in the other state, why do we have to go and pick them up to bring them back here just to continue them on supervision and send them back to the other state? So there are situations where it becomes even more complicated and, the counties really kind of balk at retaking in those situations, but.
And in that case, that's where our office would be an advocate with the other states, saying,
Right.
okay, this individual is, based on that conviction, got probation, received a probation sentence in your state. Why are you asking us now to come back, pick him up and put him in, and revoke his probation in New York State based on the same situation where you thought probation was?
Yeah, simply to either return him or
Yeah, so
supervise him under their conditions.
that's where I think our office is effective. Now, I want to give Scott on the subject of warrants and the retaking obligation. I wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything to add.
We don't run into the issues as far as the money and stuff is concerned. We have our own warrant and transfer bureau that takes care of it. Obviously, it costs money, but we don't have to deal with the counties complaining about that. One issue that I've noticed that we run into is on the technical side of things, because of our new laws in New York State, doesn't allow us to incarcerate certain violators for their behavior under less is more. We then have to order the guy or girl back to our state, which almost 100% of the times turns into an absconder where we have to actually issue a warrant. But that's the only issue that we really run into is on our technical violations that I can tell.
Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
Any other questions, further discussion? We'll turn the page. Number 9 is our rule amendments, discussion, proposals. Every other year with the commission is a rule making year where they look at rules that regions or committees have proposed. We are in your packet. I believe there is a rule amendment which we are going to propose. We haven't had much support for that rule, to be honest with you. But we are going to continue to try to gather support for the rule amendment. And Kelly, if you don't just mind giving us a brief kind of overview of what that rule is.
Okay. So Rule 3.103 is regarding the reporting instructions, which are which can be requested when an individual has been sentenced or after sentencing, and they live in another state at that time of sentencing. And those reporting instructions allow them to be present in the receiving state while their transfer is pending. So initially, that was the only population that really applied for this type of return to the receiving state, or a mandatory return to the receiving state after sentencing. So if they were sentenced in New York today, they called Florida home today. New York can request reporting instructions. Florida has to grant them and allow that person to go home pending their transfer. Years ago, there was a second population of people that were added to that list of mandatory reporting instructions. And those were the people who had already transferred their case to another state, had violated their probation, and were required to come back to New York on that violation of probation. So it was one of those, there was a new conviction in the receiving, or a new felony or violent crime conviction. They have absconded, or there was technical violations that required them to go back to the sending state. After their violation was heard in the sending state, they were continued on supervision as disposition of that violation. Well, they still live in the other state. So that population of people were added to the list of mandatory reporting instructions. So if they were brought back, continued on supervision as a disposition of their violation, they're eligible to go back to their home in that receiving state. The plain language of the rule and how it exists now simply states that after disposition of a violation or revocation proceeding, somebody is eligible to immediately go back to that state that they were living in. That wasn't really the intent of the rule. It's kind of a loophole. So if you're reading the plain language, that allows anybody who's never transferred supervision to another state. Maybe they were on supervision in New York for the last 2 years. They absconded and went to California and set up shop in California. Our probation department issued a warrant. They located them. They brought them, the individual back to New York, and now their violation has been disposed of and they were continued on supervision. Well, they're saying, well, I live in California. And we're saying, okay, you do live in California, but you lived in California outside of the compact. You never transferred there legally. And so you went there outside of the compact, you don't qualify for these mandatory reporting instructions. Some states are viewing this as they do. And so we're finding ourselves in New York having to grant or being obligated to allow somebody to come back to New York after the disposition of a violation when they never transferred their supervision here to begin with. So they came here outside of the compact and in violation of the rules, and now we're being told that we have to allow them to stay. And so that posed a lot of issues for us, specifically with two cases. We had a case where somebody was on for a domestic violence offense and they ended up here. And so we denied that request and said, no, we're not allowing this. They didn't, they weren't living here at the time of initial sentencing in their case. And we want the opportunity to make sure that this is an address that is suitable for this person to be at. And so that caused a little turmoil against New York and the other states, but there are a couple of states that are in agreement with our perspective on this rule. But the proposed changes would make it clear that only the people who had initially transferred their supervision to a receiving state and were brought back on a violation and continued on supervision qualify for the mandatory reporting instructions. Because our current rule allows anybody after the disposition of a violation to be eligible for those mandatory reporting instructions. I know that's wordy, it's a lot.
And I'm gonna use a real life example. One of the things I touched on, but this will really, I think for me at least, really exposes the danger of the existing rule. We had an individual who was on for a domestic violence offense that lived in New Jersey. He wanted to come to New York State. He had no real reason to come to New York State. We, of course, with domestic violence cases, are very careful with allowing people. He had no qualifying reason to come to New York State. I don't know. He wanted to come with a friend in New York City. We said, we don't see any real reason for this person to be able to transfer to New York State. We denied the transfer request. That individual then absconded from supervision and moved to New York State anyway. We didn't know this. New Jersey then, several months later, submits another request to us, this time with the reporting instruction saying, you have to accept this case. He's living there at time of disposition of his violation. So they found him in New York State. They brought him back to New Jersey. They disposed of his case by keeping him on probation. And now we're telling us we have to accept this individual in New York State. A domestic violence case, we don't know where the victim is. We don't have time to try to find the victim. We don't know anything about the location he's going. But under the current rule, we have to accept that case, those reporting instructions, because of the plain language of that rule. We don't think that's in line with the spirit of the compact. Certainly not in line with what we believe would be victim safety. We want the opportunity to look. One, try to locate the victim and see if they know that this person's requesting transfer. We want to make sure they're not living with anybody who they may have an active order of protection or any domestic incident reports that are active. So we want that opportunity to do that. And then we want the opportunity to tell New Jersey, yes, we will accept this case, or no, we don't, we have concerns. The way the rule's built now, we don't have that. We have an automatic, you have to accept these because he was found there in New York State and we disposed of his violation. He was living there at that time and you have to accept this case. We don't think that that's, that's the way that rule was accurate. So we really wanted to get back to what we believe is the original intent that if an individual transfers to New York State, he or she is not compliant, we file a violation, he's returned to New Jersey. New Jersey says, okay, we're going to give you another chance. That person should be allowed to come back to New York State because this is where they've established a residence. That was the intent of that, and we're okay with that. The way the rule is written now, people I think have misinterpreted it. Unfortunately, people are not allowed to just show up in New York State like this individual from New Jersey, and we have to take them without the opportunity to do a full that's and that's really where I think we're trying to change the rule to really reflect the true meaning of it. Now, having said that, we're not saying that anytime somebody ends up in New York State, we're going to deny that case. But we do want the opportunity to review that and have the discretion in line with public safety, victim safety, to say no, where there's some real public or victim safety issues here, he or she has no real ties to New York State. We want the opportunity.
Is there something somewhere else that once someone absconds that either limits or prohibits what they have the right to do? Or what, right, it seems like the fact that they're absconding, it should be.
Yes. It's a great, but during the pendency of the violation, if they've absconded, they cannot relocate, but at the disposition of the violation, and that's where they become eligible for transfer when they're compact triggered. But there is nothing that says, because you've absconded, you can't relocate to another state. And honestly, if somebody's absconded and has been gone for 10 years and they've established a residence and they're working and they have family and stuff, we don't want to deny that person the ability to come back here. But we want the opportunity to look at that case and make sure that it's an appropriate place for them. That's all we're asking. In the current rule, we're not giving that up.
Obviously, given our opposition to that practice, we don't do the same in Congress.
No, and in fact, we have, this is where some of the consternation has come with us and other states, is that we say that, but we're not going to allow that person, until we get the opportunity to look, we're not going to let that person come to New York State. And now we've worked with our local probation departments to see if they can do a full investigation to make sure it's the same place and really verify that the person, is living in New York, has a residence. We've approved both of those in the end, but we were not going to automatically be in a position without knowing all that stuff to have that person relocate here. And certainly, to answer your question, John, if it was the reverse, our office would never allow Albany County to submit a reporting instructions under those circumstances to another state where that person just ended up because he or she absconded there. We would submit expedited reporting instructions, which allows the state to review and respond.
So there are times where somebody doesn't meet this criteria. If there are emergency circumstances or some reason why that person needs to be in the other state prior to their case being accepted, the rules do allow for requests to be submitted for those instances, but the sending state is supposed to provide a detailed justification explaining what the circumstances are, why they need to be in the receiving state, and then the receiving state has the the opportunity to accept or deny that request based on the information that the sending state provides them. And that's really what we are hoping happens with those cases where somebody just absconds to New York. Like Matt said, if the plan is a valid plan and is in the best interest of that person, then we would grant them anyway. But we want to have that opportunity to look at the residence first and to make sure that that's a suitable place for that person to go. But the current wording does not allow us to do that. So that was what that looks like, a lot of voting.
And we will keep the council certainly updated. I know we have some other states, as Kelly said, that really could feel the way we will continue to push those and keep the council. Any other questions?
So how much of this process, like for the offender, like, do they understand, like going into making these requests, and like how much of the process do they acknowledge of?
I think that depends on the supervising officer and their knowledge of the compact, because often I'll receive phone calls often from individuals who are on supervision, and they'll say, I'm trying to figure out, how to transfer my case or what the status of my case is. And so once I explain to them the process, they're like, okay, well, why didn't my officer tell me that? And I said, well, unfortunately, it's a small, Interstate is a small piece of what probation officer might do in a day, and they all have varying knowledge of the rules and the processes. So we do have a designee in each county that is skilled in interstate transfers, and they would be, often I would refer them to that person also to talk to about the process, but I would say they only know what they're told by their probation officer or supervisor, maybe. Unless they Google, the commission does have a website, so, and there are kind of FAQs and, they have various information tools and things on their website, so they might get some information from there as well.
And our office does do, every other month, we do a training for probation departments called, the new ICOTS, new chaos rules training. So every other month, we do a basic 101 training on Interstate for any probation officer that is maybe new to the science or an existing probation officer that just wants to prepare. So we do a lot of training. Any questions? So number 10, moving on. One of the things I also wanted to give the membership an opportunity to do to kind of tell us anything that they're doing, whether it be Interstate related or not. But if there's anything that council members wanted to talk about, we wanted to give them the opportunity to talk about some of the things that are maybe their focal issue. So, Lisa, you want to have anything your organization is doing, or anything you want to announce?
The work is just very heavy. I did a presentation yesterday for the Institute for Disaster and Mental Health on the grief of first responders. And just kind of listening to all of the things. And, we definitely had there were some people in there from corrections, of course, lots of fire, therapists, it was the whole gamut. But the work is just system-wise very heavy. And I think that what I came away from yesterday after being there for 2 days and listening to this presentation of it's called The Arena by this retired police officer and his therapist, and the work that they did, and just kind of going through his career and tracking all of the trauma and all of the stuff, and then all of the resistance, the culture resistance around actually improving and taking care of the mental health and addressing the stress and the traumatic harm that responders experience and that officers experience, and what that process looked like. And then going into my session the following day and listening to some of the people, the participants respond to some of my questions about, how can we be better? We have pain here. And, one of the officers said, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how, if I compartmentalize my grief and the trauma and I put it on the shelf so I can do my job. I don't know how to take it off the shelf. And I don't know what to do with that. And just listening to the things that people said, I took away that the system harms at every level. That if we really want public safety, that and all of these cogs in the wheel are a part of it, that we have to look at the harm and we have to change the culture. and that it is very cold. I mean, my heart wet, but I took away that we really have to look at the system and think and honest work and conversations around the culture of the systems, because it doesn't matter what we put in place policy-wise, the culture of it says, no, this is not acceptable. This is how we're gonna do it. And if you don't do it this way, we are going to punish you. And to hear that officer, after all of the years of sacrifice and service that he gave, to say he didn't get his walkout at retirement because, an officer who was physically injured 2 weeks prior had to retire because of that physical injury, got his walkout. How everybody came from all over to celebrate, to be present, given his badge and all these different rituals they have, right? And to hear him say 2 weeks later, all of those years of service, he didn't get that because he took retirement because of his PTSD. And yeah, so that was my aha. I was like, this is broken, and it's breaking how we presently do things are breaking people. And then at the end of the conference, the director of the Institute presented a survey of first responders, and they had like 6,000 respondents. It was a huge number. And when you look at those numbers across the board in terms of the stress, the trauma, but here's the kicker, the harm to families, right? The cost of the work to families, and what does that look like on the other end? And I just said, this is not sustainable. There's no way that we're not doing harm on every angle. And it's not sustainable. When I hear a correctional officer say, I'm about to retire, and I don't know what my life will look like when I'm not forced to have to work 16-hour shifts. And I'm scared. So that's what I took away. So I was kind of like,
Thanks for sharing, Lisa. Do you have any updates from?
The big thing, not necessarily related to any of what we talked about today, for OBS will be our upcoming RFA, to be released probably next year. Our contracts run 3-year cycles. This current contract cycle will be up at the end of September of 25. So we'll be doing the RFA for the victim assistance programs. We're in the middle, well, not in the middle, but we're in the early stages of getting that put together. It's a long process. It's those who've done that is familiar with creating it, getting it approved, getting it out, collecting the applications themselves, grading them, and having contracts in place for October 1 of 2025. So we're going to be quite busy. The good news is the governor in the enacted budget put in place state funds that would allow us to fully fund our third year, the final year of the current contract cycle, and put additional state funds recurring thereafter in case there were other gaps in the federal funding. We're hopeful that with President Biden's proposals that we should see an increase, not an increase to the extent that it was a few years ago in the nearly $200 billion range, but at least something that is a bit higher than we've received the past couple of years as far as an award, and that it would allow more predictability on the behalf of the administrative agencies from year to year. This is what we will be receiving. So we hit a bit of a hiccup, but we're thinking that we're going to start to see some stability.
When I took this position, the RFA process was astonishing. The amount of work that goes in to that process was like.
And everybody who applies it tells us how onerous it is writing the applications. And I always come back to them and say, you should try reading 200 of them or 400 of them, but that's the amount that you see.
Well, we thank you for your service.
Thanks.
Yep.
Chelsea, anything from the parole board?
Nothing really not prepared to share today, but you know, we're getting close to the end of session, so always hopeful to listen before get more stuff.
Thanks, Chelsea. I do realize that this is one of my additions to the agenda. That we've never really asked for any updates. I wanted to give the members an opportunity to talk a little bit about things that they're doing.
Nothing to report other than we have not received any nominations. So there's very little time left, but let's see.
Well, we are doing some innovative stuff with the ECJS Project Rise funding. So there's lots of good things happening in Albany because of that funding. I was at City Hall before I came here for a meeting. And we were able to listen to some of first the panel talk about, you know, how we can have a safe summer, how we can kind of, you know, reduce some of the violence and some of those panelists are, you know, their programs are funded by the money, still Urban Grief under Trinity Alliance. We have some things that we've been able to do. So one of the things that we've been doing is being able to provide therapy and some group support to people who are formerly incarcerated, but also to family members whose loved ones are going through the process of like criminal proceedings and convictions and sentencings. And so we're going to be reaching out to the public defender's office so that we can build a direct pipeline to, you know, kind of like maybe cherry pick a few cases and offer families that support. And it's a stigmatized reach because we're victim services, but you know, to be able to do some work with the people who have been convicted of doing harm and helping them to heal and addressing the mental health component has a preventative mechanism to keep them from recidivism. So that's what we're working on.
And DCJS is working on the continuation of Project Rise?
Yes, and we are so grateful.
And the contract, the new contracts are funding in July, starting in July.
Yeah, so definitely grateful. And that process does not look like on our end, and we are thankful. And we are thankful for that.
A little bit of innovation, it's work.
Yeah.
That was one of the motivations of doing that. So programs didn't have to wrestle and weren't prepared to wrestle a big RFA, right?
Yeah.
And still be able to. Is there anything else you want to talk about? WCJS? Kelly, anything? Scott or Tim, is there anything going on at Docs you'd like to inform the council on?
No, nothing from me, Matt. Everything's pretty much the same here.
Thank you,
And Matt,
Scott.
and everybody, I'm sorry, sorry about that. I just wanted to mention very quickly, I know that, you know, we're winding down here, but Matt, Kelly, and Scott, thank you very much. Very informative meeting. Excellent preparation as always. Fantastic numbers on compliance. And, you know, continue to be really encouraged by that effective communication and collaboration that seems to continue throughout, because it really does lend to a highly effective supervision process, whether it be probation, parole, or post-release supervision. So many thanks for your efforts.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, thank you all for those updates. Last thing, new business, I just have one update, and I know we want to all get moving, but it is a big piece of hit for final and public comment. The work that the Rules Committee has done on removing the term offender from the rules of the Interstate Compact. That's been replaced with supervised individual. And the commission has really taken a stance where we want to make this more kind of human-centric, to see individuals under supervision, not as offenders, not as probationers, not as parolees, not that stigmatizing language. So they've made some steps to change all the term that has been used previously as offender to supervised individual. I will share the new rules where the changes are reflected with the council. It just got to my desk yesterday afternoon, so we didn't have an opportunity to really get it ready for the membership. But I will share that with you. I'm sure everybody's been dying, waiting to I get home and read that, but it is really a significant step in I think the commission moving towards changing some of the language, the stigmatizing practices that language then has. So I'm very happy to report that, and we'll share that with and it is open for public comment, so if anybody on the council that would like to submit comments, please feel free to do so. That's some exciting news. That will go to the full vote. Those changes will go to the full vote this September in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the annual business meeting will be held. It will go to the full commission for the vote, and I don't expect much of any resistance. Once again, yes, thank you to the members. Thank you to everybody who's joined us in person and remotely for the continued support of this council. Said that, I will make a motion to adjourn the spring 2024 State Commission for Supervision, New York State Council. Anybody would like to second that motion to close?
I second Matt.
We will close. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Kelly, thank you for all your work leading up to this and the slides. It was a thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks. Sorry.